One of the cool things about Bitcoin as an asset, and one of the cool things about cryptocurrency as an asset class, is that we can see everything that happens on chain. This is something you can't do with gold, you can't do this with stocks. It's obviously because everything is on a open blockchain, it's on a public ledger, and because of this is the first time in history, I believe, that you can do an on-chain analysis of what's going on with an asset. And because of this, we have people like Willy Woo. He's an expert, he's an on-chain analyst, a partner at Adaptive Capital Hedge Fund. I've referenced him plenty of times on the channel before. Of course, he's not always right, but I respect what he has to say because he studies how money is changing hands. He studies the rate, he studies the momentum. And the point is this, he just put himself on record. He tweeted out, on-chain momentum is crossing into bullish. Prep for halvening front running here on in. Now, I can't say what this indicator is as it's proprietary to Adaptive Capital, but it tracks investor momentum. The bottom is most likely in. Anything lower will just be a wick in the macro view. And then somebody asked him, well, what degree of confidence are you saying this? And he goes, I only tweet when I'm at high confidence, else it erodes my reputation. So, he cares about his reputation and he's putting that on the line with this tweet. The bottom is most likely in. Prep for halvening front running. On-chain momentum is crossing into bullish. So, with Bitcoin sitting at $7,500 after a 50% correction, after a retest of the 144-week moving average, something, if you look, has held up in prior bear turning to bull markets. Is 7,500 a good time to scale into Bitcoin? Buy the dip, cost average. That's up to you. I am personally very bullish on the future of Bitcoin. For instance, there have never been this many Bitcoin addresses holding Bitcoin in the history of Bitcoin. The total number of Bitcoin addresses that hold any amount of Bitcoin has hit an all-time high at 28.39 million addresses, surpassing the previous all-time high, which was achieved January 10th, 2018, just when Bitcoin and just when all the altcoins were coming off their ultimate peak, when Bitcoin was at $20,000, when Ripple was at over $3. That was the peak of Bitcoin wallet addresses. And just about 2 years later, we have finally surpassed that metric. And as I've pointed out on this channel plenty of times before, and if you subscribe to Altcoin Daily, you know this, it seems like almost every metric has hit an all-time high in 2019 or close to hitting an all-time high in 2019, except for the price of Bitcoin. But this is one of those things that makes me bullish on the future of Bitcoin. Like this. Millennials trust Bitcoin-based equities over Microsoft, over Disney stock. Analysis of self-directed brokerage accounts shows a generational divide in selecting assets. The older generation, Generation X investors, have no exposure to Bitcoin through financial instruments, but millennials have bought into Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. The analysis in the latest Schwab report reveals that the newest generation of investors allocates around 1.84% of their portfolio to GBTC stock, more than it allocates for blue chip companies like Walt Disney, Microsoft, and Berkshire Hathaway. Millennials, unfortunately, held brokerage balances of only about $70,000, which is 5 times lower in comparison to the size of boomer portfolios. But with one of the greatest wealth transfers in history coming up, more funds can move into a new type of portfolio with a spot for Bitcoin investments. So eventually, the older generation is going to pass on their wealth to the newer generation. And we're already seeing that millennials are saying, yeah, let me throw 1% into this. I understand it. It seems to be performing well. What happens as Bitcoin gains more awareness and gains more trust? 2%, 3%, 5%? Anyways, you can see it here. 5th most common stock held by millennials is Grayscale Investment Trust. So millennials like to hold Amazon, Apple, Tesla, Facebook, and Bitcoin over things like Walt Disney, Netflix, Microsoft, Alibaba. Now, the question is, and actually the Wall Street Journal, they recently brought this up. The headline was, if Bitcoin looks like it isn't trading hands, it's because it isn't. About 9.1 million Bitcoins, representing about 51% of those outstanding, haven't changed hands in at least 6 months. And the question is this really good for Bitcoin? If Bitcoin is money, shouldn't it be used as the medium of exchange? And we've talked about this before, but something I want to bring up is something we haven't talked about before, and that's an economic theory known as Gresham's law. Let's talk about this, and then you tell me if this makes sense. So Gresham's law in economics is a monetary principle stating that when there are two forms of commodity money in circulation which are accepted by law as legal tender and the same face value, the more valuable one, the good money, the hard money, will be hoarded and will actually disappear from circulation, while the less valuable one, the bad money, will be passed on for transactions. So $100 of Bitcoin, which is a harder money, will be hoarded, as opposed to $100 of fiat money will just be used for circulation because people don't want, it to get inflated and it's going to lose value. And what's behind this principle, the first time it appeared was in the 16th century. Sir Thomas Gresham explained to Queen Elizabeth I, the Queen of England and the Queen of Ireland, what was happening to the English shilling. Because Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, had actually replaced 40% of the silver in the coins with non-precious metals as a source of income for the government without having to raise taxes. So it's a form of inflation in itself. Now, astute merchants and many ordinary subjects would actually hold on to the previous good shillings made from pure silver, and then they just use the bad ones for buying things. So the pure silver coins disappeared from circulation. So the point is, the fact that Bitcoin isn't being used as a medium of exchange at this point isn't a problem because people value it. People see it as true valuable. And if you look at the history of money, this has happened with gold, this has happened with seashells, beads, whatever. Money first starts out as a collectible, then it turns into a store value, and then it turns into a widespread medium of exchange, and then finally, lastly, a unit of account before it becomes full global money. So right now, we're somewhere in between digital collectible and store value, and I think in the next few years, Bitcoin is going to be seen as a reliable store of value in the world stage. All right. Hey, appreciate you guys tuning in today. I'm going to leave you with this video. It's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, just from 3 days ago, talking about Bitcoin, Libra, and the Federal Reserve making their own coin. Now, there's really no huge takeaway from this video. It's kind of all over the place. I guess the only takeaway is that Bitcoin and crypto is being talked about on the world stage in serious conversations, and that's a really good thing, in my opinion. I like what this person had to say. He says, honestly, this video, it's not too informative. We know, Steve, Bitcoin, China's digital currency, and Libra, we know they're all different. Thanks for that illuminating commentary. He sort of just rambles and throws out buzzwords like KYC and tries to sound knowledgeable. I bet he still doesn't have a rudimentary understanding or ability to explain Bitcoin blockchain. Someone send him a copy of Inventing Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Standard, Internet of Value, and then Mastering Bitcoin. So make sure you guys subscribe to the channel if you're new. Make sure you like the video if you want to support this kind of work. And I'll leave you with this video of Steve Mnuchin rambling about crypto and Bitcoin.
First issue I want to talk about today is with regards to the new digital currency Libra that's being proposed by Facebook. We had Mr. Zuckerberg in here recently, and he explained his intentions and how this is all going to take place. Since then, China has made an announcement with regards to their own digital currency, and there's been some calls for the Fed to issue its own currency. And I'd just like for you to give us your position on it and where you see it going and what your thoughts may be on it, because it does seem to have some legs.
Sure. Well, let me just comment that when people talk about digital currencies, it's a large, vastly different area and different sectors have different things. Specifically, as it relates to Libra, we've had probably a dozen meetings with Facebook. We've shared our concerns. It's part of the reason why they're slowing down their movement forward. We've discussed this at the G7 and the G20. I am fine if Facebook wants to get into digital payments. That's fine, and that may be good for their customer base and good for a lot of Americans who don't have access to banks. We want to make sure if they do it, they're doing it in a way that is fully compliant with our BSA, AML, and that in no way can this be used for terrorist financing and illicit activities.
Okay, but the Chinese have decided to get into this as well. And so the last half of my question was, there's been some thought process about the Fed getting into it and having their own digital currency. Is this something you see necessary, something you don't want to get into, something that shouldn't be out there? Where do you see this going?
So again, I would differentiate what China is doing from what a Bitcoin or a Facebook would do. What China is doing is really issuing digital currency in lieu of physical cash, and they can track all that. So they will be able to track where that goes. That's different than a Bitcoin. It's no different than in the U.S. if money is sent on the Fed wire system, it can be tracked, and money through SWIFT has identifiers. So again, I would differentiate kind of what central banks are doing from what a Libra or a Bitcoin is doing. As it relates to the Fed, and Chair Powell and I have discussed this at length, I think we both agree for the near future, in the next 5 years, we see no need for the Fed to issue digital currency, and that's because, again, we have a very sophisticated system. The Fed is working on electronic payment system. We need to make sure they're real-time electronic payment system in the U.S., but thank you for your concern.